I never quite realized how much nostalgia I still carried for 2010's Call of Duty Black Ops, until about 2 months ago, when I watched the reveal trailer for the new Black Ops Cold War. Promoted as, at last, a direct sequel to the original game from a decade ago, it showed us known faces like Hudson, Woods and Mason back in action. It included those familiar elements, like how the President of the United States, this time in the form of Ronald Reagan, plays a key role, while the classic soundtrack choices instantly brought back those vibes of the Cold War era. Safe to say, they sold me on it straight away, and as a result, out of sheer excitement, I ended up booting up the first game again to see how it had held up. Unfortunately, I was to some extent reminded why I usually never revisit previous generations to go back and replay old games. They just never tend to age as well as you'd like to think, and all the small but certainly present annoyances are the first things to stand out. It's obviously the last generation graphics, the silly soldier animations and other lacking details that come with that, but even what should be impactful voice line deliveries suddenly sound cheesy and don't quite live up to the awesome story-driven experience that you remember from all those years ago. Nonetheless, it doesn't take long to get to the point where you simply take those things for granted. I completed my entire playthrough, and ultimately, what didn't change was my conviction that Black Ops remains the best example of a Call of Duty single player done right. One that fundamentally understood how to tell an engaging story in what is otherwise admittedly an incredibly mainstream first-person shooter series, where you have to wait and see every year whether you're gonna get a great, decent, mediocre, or as we've even seen, a possibly non-existent campaign this time around. The reason Black Ops still manages to be so memorable for many people is I think because it wasn't just the usual spectacular rollercoaster ride you'd come to expect even back then, but one that left you curious even after you beat it. I myself remember actually looking up historical details, diving into conspiracy theories online, and just wanting to learn more about the events that transpired during its time. Especially back in those days, as a 16-year-old in high school, I sure remember I couldn't give a damn about history lessons in my class. To justify the hundreds of hours I'd spent playing games, I always liked to convince my parents of the positive roles games could play, but I can confidently say that Black Ops actually pushed me to become much more interested in studying about the past eventually. But educational influences aside, at its core, Black Ops is of course just an entertainment product, and there is nothing wrong with that. As a Call of Duty game, it contains all the ingredients we've come to expect from a great COD campaign, like the variety in locations, massive set-piece moments, and surrounding you with a select group of soldiers who will come to feel like your trustworthy squad by the end. On top of that, there is a large emphasis on mysterious and psychological elements that give the story its unique twist. There is one more aspect in which Black Ops unquestionably shines, and it becomes visible from the first second you start up the game. It has an amazing visual style. Opening credits and cutscenes in between missions are all distinctly stylized and made up out of real-world footage from its respective time period. The main menu is a fully interactive one and relates to the narrative of the game. As Alex Mason, you're being interrogated by an unknown group and find yourself strapped to a chair in a small dark space surrounded by TV screens. They push images on you of historical events to stimulate your senses and help you remember details of the past. As a player though, they manage to immerse yourself into this timeline. Some of it you may recognize and some of it may leave you wondering, well, what does this actually pertain to? Within the main menu, it's even possible to break out of the chair and walk around in the room, where you can access a console and use various cheat codes, for example to play a top-down twin-stick shooter minigame called Dead Ops. Little touches like these blew my mind when I found out about them, and they all add up to make this installment truly feel like a passion project over some of its recent numbered sequels that, in my opinion, just felt so much more forced and uninspiring.
7, 19, 20, 10, 14, 2, 3, 19, 0, 8, 11, 22, 21, 5, 17.
When finally starting a new game then, the menu disappears and smoothly transitions into the interrogation that turns heated and the story can finally begin to be explained. The two mysterious guys in the room in front of you ask Mason about the visions he keeps having of a collection of numbers. Mason is clearly frustrated as he constantly sees the numbers but just can't tell what they actually mean. And so you are led to retell the story exactly how it happened in order to remember how things then unfolded.
The numbers, Mason. What do they mean? Where are they broadcast?
I don't know anything about any numbers.
What about Dragovich? Do you remember him? Give us what we want, we'll guarantee your safety.
Ah!
Let's start at the beginning. Cuba, 1961, the Bay of Pigs. We know you were there.
It all kicks off with a special covert operation in which Mason took part with the goal to assassinate Cuban's leader Fidel Castro and help the CIA in overthrowing its communist regime. Together with squad mates Woods and Bowman, you ambush a couple of soldiers in a cafe and are then forced to escape the streets of Havana in absolute chaos, driving through police barricades and hours later making it to Castro's secret compound. Although initially seemingly succeeding to kill Castro, the mission then goes terribly wrong at the airport. Mason gets captured, wakes up at a dock, only to find out he had killed a double instead.
You think we didn't know of your plan?
We always know.
Do with him what you wish, General. He's my gift to you, in honor of our new relationship. Just make sure that he suffers.
He will know suffering beyond his darkest fears. I have plans for you, American.
Castro hands Mason over to his Russian ally Dragovich as a gift, who in turn throws Mason into the gulag of Vorkuta, where he would be held captive for 2 years. In this time, Mason meets Viktor Reznov, a former Red Army soldier and a notable character of Treyarch's previous game World at War, who Mason then becomes friends with. Reznov eventually sparks an uprising, and with the help of hundreds of other prisoners, he allows him to escape the labor camp. To ensure Mason's survival though, he doesn't join him but instead decides to distract the pursuing trucks. He gets left behind as Mason makes it out alive. These two missions form the setup for an intriguing plot, and it's from here on out that we can notice Mason's take of what had happened no longer seems completely accurate. Something about it feels slightly off, and purposefully intended so. That's because we'll later learn that the missing events within this time span are crucially needed information in order to understand how Mason perceives the remaining part of the story as he tells it to have played out. From this moment forward, the numbers begin to intervene in his thought processes, causing his mental problems. About a year later, Mason is summoned to a secret briefing in the Pentagon, and although it's only a short, completely scripted sequence, for me this third mission may as well be Black Ops' greatest highlight. In case you already have any knowledge or appreciation for American politics, its history or iconic figures, then this scene is made 10 times more impactful, and if you don't, you could definitely develop some of that here. This sequence perfectly conveys the sense of eeriness Mason feels through its overall direction, having you look at your protagonist from both first person as well as outside perspectives, as he's being looked at by everyone in the building and arrives at the nerve center. It's here where we meet the one and only John F. Kennedy, 35th President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief at the time of this encounter. JFK instructs you to go after Dragovich and dismantle the Russian space program in the process. But again, from this mission on, Mason is clearly seen suffering from deep psychological issues. The numbers now interrupt your sight at random times. He even envisions himself pulling a gun right at JFK for reasons unknown. Not only that, we can visually see objects within Mason's vicinity transform. The monitors in the back suddenly show images of newspaper headlines of Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and photos taken on November 22nd, 1963. Of course, anyone merely aware of the basic details would know what it is alluding to. Just a few short weeks following this meeting, John F. Kennedy would meet his inevitable death, a controversial assassination that in real life remains subject of lots of debate and conspiracy theories until this very day. Something is clearly up. Mason knows it, you as the player can sense it. The question is, what?
Dragovich.
I'm told that you are the very best that we have. Anywhere. You will need to be. Mr. Mason, take care of it.
Well, unfortunately we don't get to find out anytime soon. Mason succeeds at disrupting the Soviet space program, but becomes obsessed with killing Dragovich for the next 5 years, as the Russian Major General made it out alive. It's not just Dragovich, however. There are 3 names Mason vividly remembers Reznov telling him about during his time in Vorkuta. Dragovich, Kravchenko, and Steiner, all must die, is the quote we repeatedly hear him utter in his voice. Through a flashback level with Reznov in 1945, right after the Allies' victory in World War II, we learn what it is these men had done. They betrayed and ruthlessly murdered their own soldiers, including one of Reznov's dear friends, to test out a biochemical weapon. The Nova 6 nerve gas remained in the Russians' possession to be used against opponents later. Now back to Mason, most of the remaining campaign takes place in 1968, during the Vietnam War. Story-wise, this is where the narrative hits a bit of a halt in terms of progression, as you simply remain focused on tracking down the 3 targets and investigating clues as to find out about their whereabouts. You actually end up reconciling with Reznov, who miraculously turns out to have escaped Vorkuta and joins Mason's team on their shared quest for revenge for the rest of the game. Now, this short break in story development gives me the perfect opportunity to touch on gameplay for a little bit. By no means is it anything beyond the Call of Duty formula that we'd already come to expect even then, but Black Ops certainly applied it very well. The game constantly manages to switch up the more generic first-person shooter gameplay with spectacular set-piece moments and interesting character confrontations. This time around though, it tried to put you more in control than a Call of Duty single player had ever done before, as I remember the fact you were given the freedom to steer almost every vehicle over just sitting there and having it drive you around being a first for the series. You had an epic motorbike chase, a level piloting a helicopter, a base infiltration during a snowstorm where you end up having to skydive to flee the scene. Hell, there's even a sequence on a military patrol boat where Sympathy for the Devil from the Rolling Stones plays as you're mowing down enemies left and right. Sure, it is as cliche as you can get. Hell, even Fortunate Son plays on the radio, but you tell me, what better alternatives are there? Black Ops conveyed the ambience of the Vietnam War in the best way possible, and I just can't avoid a sense of fulfillment as I'm playing through it. Nonetheless, this experience was also meant to represent war, and in serious conflict, violence can be brutal. You'd sometimes perform the most vicious stealth kills from behind, limbs would come off enemy bodies as you shot them, and the game clearly seemed to have no problem showing you how much gore can be the consequence of that war. Now, where the Modern Warfare series could at times confuse you as to where and who you were exactly playing as this time around, in Black Ops it is Mason who clearly gets the main focus, and in the rare instances where that isn't the case, you play as characters who constantly surround him. As a result, you spend all your time around the same squad mates, being Hudson, Reznov, Woods and Bowman, and so you develop a bit of a connection to these characters over time. Hudson is the overly serious CIA operator, to much frustration of Woods, who is clearly the don't mess with me type. Meanwhile, Reznov is the guy with a clear cause, and Bowman the reliable ally who will go through fire and water for you. It makes it a genuinely saddening moment when Bowman meets his demise, refusing to take part in a Russian roulette game, and that goes double for Woods, who is taken along with Kravchenko in his grenade blast. Of course, we would later find out in Black Ops 2 that Woods survived the explosion after all.
Woods? You're okay.
Are you okay? Mason.
Reznov.
Kravchenko is dead. Dragovich, Kravchenko, Stein, all must die.
For God's sake, where is the number station?
All must die.
We are now nearing the conclusion of the story, but before we get there, we definitely need some answers first. What are the numbers? Why do so many things happening seem so off? And who is Mason even interrogated by? Well, what better way is there to explain the situation than by simply showing us? The prelude to the finale is experienced from two perspectives. As Mason, you find Steiner at Rebirth Island, where in an act of rage we see Reznov killing the scientist as payback for helping out the Soviets with their Nova 6 program. However, then reaching the same location through Hudson's eyes, it becomes clear Mason is acting fully on his own accord. There is no Reznov alongside of him, it is him speaking Reznov's line and pulling the trigger by himself. Back in the interrogation room, we then finally discover the full truth. It turns out that during his time in Vorkuta, Mason was brainwashed by Dragovich. He was made to receive and interpret the numbered codes he constantly sees as messages, allowing him to perform certain acts subconsciously as a sleeper agent for the Russians. There are more people like Mason, all scattered across the USA, ready to deploy Nova 6 at the Russians' command. However, Dragovich's attempts on Mason did not have the total desired effect, for a reason even he could not have foreseen. Reznov, during the time that the two spent in Vorkuta, managed to reprogram Mason for his own sake of getting revenge. He planted the idea into him to kill Dragovich, Kravchenko and Steiner, and now resides as a vision within his mind. The Reznov we see past Vorkuta was never real. Reznov actually died, leaving Mason behind, and people who carefully paid attention could have realized this in advance. You see, none of Mason's squadmates ever acknowledge Reznov's existence across the whole journey. They don't speak to him, they don't mention his name. In one level, an ally even reacts by saying what the fuck is wrong with you after he hears Mason give a command to his imaginary friend, before he's viciously murdered and we don't get the opportunity to ask him why. Although requiring you to suspend your disbelief a little bit, I think it's a really cool plot twist that makes all the puzzle pieces at last fall into place. The final objective is to find the ship that broadcasts the numbers and put an end to Dragovich at last. Mason finds and drowns him, angry not only for the emotional damage that he caused on him, but the acts he tried making him perform, like being programmed to pull a gun on President Kennedy as we saw early on. This is where Dragovich grins, realizing Mason doesn't yet realize the full extent of the actions he undertook. While the game initially appears to end on a happy and conclusive note, an after-credit scene then reveals one last detail to blow your mind once more.
17, 0, 10, 2, 23, 1, 8, 11, 25, 22,
22.
9, 4,
6.5 millimeter.
9, 23, 1, 12, 0, 12, 16,
11, 22.
6, 12, 8, 4.
On the day of Kennedy's assassination in 1963, we see images of the president getting out of his plane. Among hundreds of people in the crowd, the unmistakable presence of Mason is visible, implying it was him who may have fired that fatal bullet. Right after seeing this ending, it got me to research the JFK assassination conspiracy, and ever since I've become literally obsessed with learning about dozens of other fascinating theories. For me, I will always view that to be the game's biggest achievement. Call of Duty Black Ops would go on to sell over 25 million copies and became a phenomenon for many more reasons than the campaign we just extensively discussed. Naturally, a large part of the fanbase skipped the single player entirely, playing it for multiplayer first and foremost, and don't get me wrong, so did I. Maps like Nuketown and Firing Range became classics, driving RCXDs into enemy territory was a blast, and wager matches like Gun Game, One in the Chamber and Sticks and Stones found their origins here. On top of that, knowing that the game was developed by Treyarch, obviously Zombies comes to mind, and here also I have countless of stories to share. I can't tell you how many circles I must have run around Kino der Toten, or what fun I had teaming up with the same small group of friends, either trying to find all the Easter eggs or trolling around by leaving them hanging just as they arrived at my minecart in Shangri-La. The memories are infinite, they are precious, and I will always remember them. But somehow, when I revisit Black Ops in my head, it always just ends up bringing me back to the campaign. Of course, I'll stress out once more, we are talking about a Call of Duty game here. Can you expect those to offer a super deep or complex narrative? Obviously not. Can companions truly get the kind of character development they deserve in just 5 hours of gameplay? The answer is also no. That being said, maybe it's all the more impressive that being aware of its limitations, Black Ops understood what would make for a memorable story, not merely relying on the usual Hollywood blockbuster moments a game like this normally would. It gave you a squad of people you cared about, historical touchpoints that increased your sense of wonder, and plot twists that left your jaw wide open and had you relive the journey a second time through a whole different lens. It opened up avenues to new interests, allowed kids like me to mature in my way of thinking, learning about history and exploring the many facets and viewpoints that come with it. Oh yeah, and it was a pretty fun game. I guess that's another plus. Thanks a lot everybody for watching this little retrospective on Call of Duty Black Ops. I really hope you enjoyed it. It's a game that I reminisce about very fondly, and for that reason I am more excited for Black Ops Cold War than I initially thought I would be before it actually got announced. So I can only hope that it can live up to the same standard that the original did. Let me know in the comments if you're going to be getting the game yourself as well, of course. That being said, I've currently got 2 projects in the works for you to look forward to. I'm going to keep one a secret for now because I'm still kind of working out the details, but it should make for a very interesting video. The other one is that in 2 weeks from now, Uncharted 3 will be turning 9 years old. And of course, I made huge videos looking back at the first as well as second Uncharted game a while ago already. I never got around to doing Uncharted 3, so now should make for the perfect time. And of course, within the series, Uncharted 3 also is going to be a very interesting entry to talk about, I guess. So with that being said, if you enjoy everything that I do, then of course, please consider heading over to patreon.com/robingaming, where for just $1 a month, you allow me to make videos like this, you help support me and making these videos possible, and you also get a bunch of really cool rewards in return, like for example, early access to scripts, as well as videos. You can check out every single one of the videos that I make in advance before anybody else does on YouTube in return. So with that being said, thanks a lot for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one.